The moment Wren Walker stepped into the grand ballroom, she felt completely out of place. The chandeliers sparkled like captured stars, and the scent of expensive champagne mixed with designer perfume filled the air. This charity auction was supposed to be about raising money for the local children's hospital. Yet everywhere she turned, it seemed more like a playground for the elite. People in gowns worth more than her yearly salary sipped on cocktails, chatting idly about their latest vacations to private islands. She adjusted the simple navy dress she had borrowed from her best friend and took a deep breath. She wasn't here for the luxury or the spectacle, she was here to help. As one of the hospital's volunteer coordinators, she had spent months organizing this event, securing donations, and making sure the auction items were ready to go. What she hadn't expected was him. Standing near one of the art displays, surrounded by a group of impeccably dressed businessmen, was Silas Grant, billionaire, media mogul. The kind of man whose name was whispered in financial circles and splashed across magazine covers. Even Wren, who never paid attention to the lives of the ultra-wealthy, knew who he was. He was powerful, untouchable, and devastatingly handsome, and he was looking straight at her. Wren's stomach flipped, but she quickly looked away. There was no reason for a man like him to be interested in her. He was probably just glancing past her, scanning the room for someone important. Still, when she moved toward the front of the ballroom, she felt the weight of his gaze lingering. The auction was about to begin, and Wren took her place near the stage, clutching the clipboard that held the list of items. She listened as the announcer introduced the first few pieces: a rare bottle of wine, an exclusive yacht trip, a diamond necklace. The bids flew in, numbers climbing higher and higher, making her dizzy. Then came the next item, something Wren had never expected to be part of the auction. A private dinner with one of our esteemed volunteers, Miss Wren Walker. Her heart stopped. She whipped her head toward the announcer, her eyes wide. "What?" she whispered. The man on stage chuckled. "As a special surprise, one of our generous donors has sponsored this item. A lovely evening with Miss Walker, complete with a private chef and a rooftop view of the city." Wren's pulse pounded. She hadn't agreed to this. Who had put her up for auction like some kind of prize? Before she could protest, a voice rang out from the crowd. $20,000. The room hushed. Wren turned her head, her breath catching. Silas Grant had spoken. The auctioneer seemed stunned for only a moment before regaining his composure. "A very generous bid. Do we have 50,000? Another voice cut in. Wren barely had time to process it before Silas spoke again, his voice calm and commanding. 100,000. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. The other bidder, a wealthy real estate mogul, hesitated before shaking his head. He wasn't going to challenge a billionaire. "Sold," the auctioneer declared, slamming the gavel. "Mr. Grant wins the evening with Miss Walker." The applause was deafening, but Wren barely heard it over the sound of her own heartbeat. Silas Grant had just spent $100,000 for a dinner with her. Why? As the event continued, Wren did her best to focus, but her mind kept circling back to Silas. By the time the auction ended, she had convinced herself that he had only bid out of boredom or charity. Maybe he just wanted to help the hospital and saw this as an easy way to do so. But when the night was winding down and guests were starting to leave, she felt a presence beside her. "Miss Walker." Her breath hitched. She turned and found herself staring into the most piercing blue eyes she had ever seen. Up close, Silas Grant was even more striking, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a flawlessly tailored black suit. "Mr. Grant," she managed, her voice steady despite the way her stomach flipped. "That was unexpected." His lips curved slightly. "I wanted to make sure I won." Wren frowned. "Why?" He studied her for a moment, as if deciding how much to say. Then, in a voice smooth and assured, he replied, "Because I wanted to have dinner with you." Her heart pounded. This wasn't a joke. He wasn't just being charitable. Silas Grant had wanted to win her, and she had absolutely no idea what that meant. Wren Walker had never been on a date with a billionaire before, and if she was being completely honest, she wasn't sure she wanted to start now. The whole situation felt surreal. One minute, she had been overseeing the charity auction, making sure everything ran smoothly, and the next, she had been sold off like an antique vase to one of the most powerful men in the city. Silas Grant had arranged for their dinner the very next evening. A sleek black car arrived at her modest apartment right on time, the driver stepping out to open the door for her. Inside, the leather seats were impossibly smooth, and the scent of something rich and expensive lingered in the air. When they arrived at the restaurant, if it could even be called that, Wren realized just how out of her depth she was. The entire place was closed for the evening. No bustling waitstaff, no other diners, just candlelit tables and a soft melody from a grand piano in the corner. Silas was already there, standing near a table set for two. He looked effortless in a crisp white shirt, the sleeves rolled up just enough to show the toned lines of his forearms. His watch gleamed under the warm light, but his focus was solely on her. "You came," he said, pulling out a chair for her. She hesitated before sitting. "I didn't have much of a choice, did I?" His lips curved slightly, though there was something unreadable in his expression. "You could have refused." She fiddled with the edge of the linen napkin. "And waste $100,000. I'd never forgive myself." A quiet chuckle escaped him, deep and rich. "You're practical, I like that." She wasn't sure how to respond to that, so she let the silence settle between them as the first course was served. The food was exquisite, delicate bites of something she couldn't pronounce, plated like a work of art. Silas ate with an easy confidence, but Wren found herself too aware of his presence to truly enjoy the meal. Finally, she set her fork down and met his gaze. "Why did you do it?" He didn't pretend not to understand. Instead, he leaned back slightly, studying her as if weighing his words. "Because I wanted to know what kind of woman would spend an entire evening working tirelessly for a cause instead of mingling with people who could change her life with a single conversation." Wren stiffened. "I wasn't there to network." "Exactly," he said, as if that confirmed something. "You weren't trying to impress anyone. You weren't asking for favors or trying to climb some social ladder. You were just there because you cared." She didn't know how to respond to that. No one had ever paid enough attention to notice something like that about her before. Silas lifted his glass of wine, watching her over the rim. "I admire that." The words unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. Men like him didn't admire women like her. She was a normal, hard-working woman with bills to pay and no time for games. He was a billionaire who could have anything he wanted with the snap of his fingers. And yet, there was something about the way he looked at her like she was the most intriguing thing in the room. The evening passed in a strange mixture of guarded conversation and unexpected moments of ease. Silas had a sharp mind, his words carefully measured, but there was a quiet intensity beneath them. He asked about her work at the hospital, about the kids she helped, about why she had chosen a path that didn't lead to wealth or power. By the time dessert was served, Wren found herself more relaxed than she had expected. But then, Silas set his fork down and regarded her with a look that sent a shiver down her spine. "I want to see you again." The statement was so direct, so unapologetic that she nearly knocked over her glass. "Why?" A flicker of something unreadable passed through his gaze. "Because I think we both know this dinner wasn't enough." She opened her mouth, ready to protest, to remind him that they came from two different worlds, but the words wouldn't come. Because, deep down, she knew he was right. And that terrified her. Wren had every intention of turning Silas Grant down. After all, what kind of life did a man like him lead? One filled with private jets, high-rise boardrooms, and exclusive events where people like her didn't belong. She had spent years working hard to build something meaningful with her career at the hospital. She wasn't about to get distracted by a billionaire who could have anyone he wanted. And yet, when he called the next day, she found herself hesitating. He didn't ask. He stated, "I'm picking you up at 7. She should have said no. Instead, she heard herself ask, "Where are we going?" "You'll see." At exactly 7, another sleek black car arrived at her apartment, but this time Silas was inside. He looked effortless in a navy button-down, the top 2 buttons casually undone, a watch gleaming against his wrist. This wasn't a date, she told herself. This was just curiosity. The car pulled away and Wren glanced at him. "You don't seem like the kind of man who does casual dinners." "I don't," he admitted, "but you're not like anyone I've met before." Her heart stuttered. The car wove through the city, past glittering skyscrapers and tree-lined streets until it pulled up to a private airfield. Wren's stomach flipped. "What is this?" Silas stepped out first, waiting for her with an unreadable expression. "Come find out." A gleaming jet stood before them. The sight of it sent a rush of nerves through her. "You can't be serious." He met her gaze evenly. "I don't do anything halfway, Wren." She had a split second to make a choice. Walk away or take the risk. Against all logic, she stepped onto the jet. The interior was nothing like she expected. Instead of stiff luxury, it was warm, soft lighting, plush seats, a perfectly set dining table waiting for them. The scent of something rich and savory filled the air. Wren's fingers curled against her lap. "You flew me somewhere for dinner." Silas settled across from her as the plane began to taxi down the runway. Not just anywhere. Minutes later, they were in the air, the city lights fading beneath them. Wren shook her head. "This is insane." His lips curved slightly. "You say that like you don't like it." She didn't want to admit that a small part of her did. The flight was smooth, and before she knew it, they were landing again. When they stepped onto the tarmac, the warm scent of the ocean filled the air. Wren turned slowly, taking in the sight of a private villa nestled against a rocky cliffside, waves crashing below. She turned to Silas. "You flew me to another country for dinner." His gaze never wavered. "I told you, I don't do anything halfway." A private chef was already waiting inside, and soon they were seated beneath the open sky, candlelight flickering between them. As the night stretched on, their conversation deepened. Silas listened in a way most people didn't. He asked about her childhood, her dreams, the things that made her heart race. And in turn, she found herself wanting to know more about him. She learned that he hadn't come from wealth, that he had built his empire from the ground up, making ruthless decisions along the way. He spoke of power like it was both a weapon and a shield, something he wielded carefully. But there was something else, too. A loneliness beneath all that control. By the time dessert was finished, the air between them had shifted. The flirtation was still there, but now it was something heavier. Silas reached for his glass, watching her over the rim. "Tell me something, Wren. If I hadn't won that auction, would you have ever spoken to me?" She considered that. Probably not. His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "Why?" "Because men like you don't look twice at women like me." For a long moment he said nothing. Then, quietly, "I haven't stopped looking at you since the moment I saw you." Her breath caught. The night air was thick with something unspoken. She had come into this with every intention of keeping her walls up. But now, as she sat across from a man who could have had anything, yet chose to be here with her, she wasn't sure she could. And that terrified her more than anything. The night air was thick with warmth as waves crashed softly against the rocky cliffs below. The dinner plates had been cleared, the candles had burned lower, but neither Wren nor Silas made a move to leave. There was something weighty between them now, something undeniable. Wren had spent the entire evening trying to convince herself that this was nothing more than a grand gesture from a man who was used to getting his way. But now, as she sat across from him in the soft glow of the villa's terrace, she wasn't sure that was true. Silas hadn't just flown her to another country for the spectacle of it. He hadn't tried to impress her with empty words or meaningless charm. He had listened. He had seen her. And that was far more dangerous than any private jet or lavish dinner. He leaned forward slightly, his forearms resting on the table. "You're thinking too hard," she blinked, startled out of her thoughts. "I tend to do that." His gaze held steady. "What are you afraid of?" She could have lied. She could have deflected. But something about the way he looked at her made her want to tell the truth, getting caught up in something that isn't real. His fingers traced the rim of his glass, his expression unreadable. "And what makes you think this isn't real?" she swallowed. "Because men like you," he cut her off, his voice quiet but firm. "Stop saying that." Her breath hitched. Silas didn't look away. "You keep putting me in a box, Wren. Deciding who I am before I've even had the chance to show you." She opened her mouth, ready to protest, but he wasn't finished. "You think I only want you because I'm bored, that this is some kind of game for me, but you're wrong." His voice was steady, unwavering. "I don't waste my time on things that don't matter." Her heart pounded against her ribs. Silas stood slowly, rounding the table, stopping just in front of her. He reached out, hesitating for only a moment before taking her hand. His touch was warm, firm, grounding. "Come with me." She hesitated, but only for a second. He led her down a stone path that wound through the villa's gardens, the scent of salt and jasmine thick in the air. When they reached the edge of a balcony overlooking the ocean, he turned to face her. "I don't expect you to trust me right away," he said. "But I need you to know that this isn't something I do. I don't chase. I don't make time for things that don't matter." He exhaled, his fingers tightening around hers. "And you matter." Wren's throat tightened. She hadn't expected this not from him. She'd assumed he would eventually grow tired of the chase, that she would be just another fleeting interest in his world. But the way he looked at her now, like she was something rare, something important, it shattered every assumption she had made. "You don't even know me," she whispered. Silas shook his head. "I know enough." Her pulse roared in her ears. She should have been terrified. She should have found a reason to walk away, but she didn't. Instead, she stepped closer, tilting her chin up to meet his gaze. The space between them vanished, the air crackling with something electric. Silas reached up, his fingers brushing lightly against her cheek. "Tell me to stop." She couldn't. His lips met hers in a slow, deliberate kiss, his touch both demanding and careful. The world around them faded. The only thing that mattered was the warmth of his body, the strength of his hands as they tangled gently in her hair. When they finally pulled apart, Wren's breath came uneven. Silas pressed his forehead against hers, his voice a low murmur. "Stay with me." She knew he wasn't just asking about the night, he was asking for more, and for the first time she wasn't afraid to say yes. The villa was quiet except for the rhythmic crash of the waves below. The air between Wren and Silas was thick with something unspoken, something neither of them was ready to name just yet. But after that kiss, there was no denying that whatever this was, it was real. Silas had asked her to stay, not just for the evening, but for more, for something deeper. And against all logic, she wanted to. But Wren had spent her entire life being careful. She had worked too hard to build a life she was proud of, one that didn't rely on anyone else. Could she really take a risk like this? Could she allow herself to believe that a man like Silas Grant wanted her not as a passing distraction, but as something more? She stepped back slightly, needing space to clear her head. "This is happening too fast." Silas didn't argue. He simply nodded, his eyes searching hers. "I won't rush you." The sincerity in his voice made it even harder to breathe. Wren turned toward the ocean, gripping the railing as the wind lifted her hair. "I've seen men with power use it to get whatever they want. I've seen them play with people like they're just another investment and then walk away when something new catches their attention." Silas exhaled slowly. "Do you think that's what I'm doing?" She hesitated before answering. "I don't know." He moved beside her, his presence solid, grounding. "I don't play games, Wren. I don't chase things that don't matter." She closed her eyes for a brief moment. "And what if I don't fit into your world?" Silas was quiet for a long time before he spoke again. "Then I'll make room for you." Her heart clenched at the simplicity of his words. She turned to look at him, and for the first time, she allowed herself to really see him, not just the billionaire, not just the man who had swept her away in the most extravagant way possible, but the man who, in his own way, was taking just as much of a risk as she was. Wren knew she wasn't ready to give him an answer, but she also wasn't ready to walk away. Instead of speaking, she reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. A silent promise, a step forward. Silas looked down at their joined hands, something unreadable flickering in his expression. Then, gently, he squeezed her fingers. It wasn't a declaration, it wasn't a grand, sweeping moment, but it was real. And for now, that was enough. The next morning, Wren woke to the scent of salt air drifting through the open balcony doors. The villa was quiet, the only sound the distant crash of waves against the cliffs. For a moment, she lay still, absorbing the warmth of the sheets, the softness of the sunlight spilling across the room. Then, the events of the previous night came rushing back. Her fingers curled against the pillow as she remembered Silas's words, the way he had looked at her as if she were something rare, something irreplaceable. A part of her had expected to wake up and feel regret, to convince herself that she had been caught up in the moment. But she didn't. Instead, she felt something far more terrifying. Hope. A gentle knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. She sat up as Silas stepped inside, carrying a tray with fresh fruit, warm pastries, and a steaming cup of coffee. He set it on the bedside table, his expression unreadable. "I wasn't sure if you'd be ready to leave yet," he said. Wren tucked her legs beneath her, watching him carefully. "Are you?" His gaze held hers. "I'll stay as long as you do." Something about the way he said it sent warmth curling through her. He wasn't pressuring her, wasn't trying to dictate the pace of whatever this was. He was letting her decide. She reached for the coffee, taking a slow sip before setting it back down. "I think I'd like to stay a little longer." The corner of his mouth lifted, not quite a smile, but something close. "Good." They spent the rest of the morning walking along the cliffs, the ocean stretching endlessly before them. Wren had never been one for grand gestures, but she couldn't deny how effortlessly Silas made them feel natural. It wasn't about the wealth, the private jet, or the luxury. It was about the way he listened when she spoke, the way he noticed the smallest things, how she liked her coffee, how she always paused before answering a question, how she looked at the ocean like it held every answer she had ever needed. By the time they boarded the jet to return home, something between them had shifted. Back in the city, reality came rushing back. Wren returned to the hospital, diving into her work, while Silas resumed his role as one of the most powerful men in the country. But despite their separate worlds, he made sure theirs remained connected. Dinners that stretched late into the night, walks through the city away from prying eyes, moments stolen between meetings and hospital shifts. Wren had never imagined herself in something like this. A relationship with a man whose life was built on deals and power plays. And yet, with Silas, it never felt like she was being pulled into his world. Instead, he met her in the middle, making space for her in ways she never expected. One evening, weeks after their first dinner, Silas took her to an art gallery after hours. The lights were dimmed, the space quiet except for the echo of their footsteps. "Why are we here?" she asked, glancing at him. "There's something I wanted to show you." He led her to a painting near the back. It was a piece she recognized, a depiction of a vast ocean, the sky just beginning to break into dawn. She had mentioned it once in passing, saying how it reminded her of the way hope could feel distant but never unreachable. She stared at it, her throat tightening. "You remembered." Silas watched her carefully. "Of course I did." She turned to him, something fragile and overwhelming pressing against her ribs. "This isn't what I expected. What did you expect? For this to be temporary?" Her voice was quiet. "For you to lose interest?" Silas stepped closer, his fingers brushing against hers. "I don't lose interest in things that matter." Her heart stuttered. And then, before she could second-guess it, she closed the space between them, wrapping her arms around his neck and pressing her lips to his. Silas responded instantly, his hands settling against her waist, pulling her closer. The kiss was slow, deep, filled with every unspoken feeling they had yet to name. When they finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers, his voice low. "I love you." The words settled between them, heavy and real. For the first time in her life, Wren didn't run from the feeling. She smiled, her fingers tracing the edge of his jaw. "I love you too." Silas exhaled as if those words had been the only thing he'd been waiting for. Weeks later, he took her back to the villa, the place where everything had started. But this time, there was a small box in his pocket. As the sun dipped below the horizon, he turned to her, his expression more vulnerable than she had ever seen it. "I don't want to spend another day without knowing you'll always be by my side," he said. "Marry me." Wren's breath caught as he opened the box, revealing a ring that shimmered in the fading light. She didn't hesitate. "Yes." Silas pulled her into his arms, kissing her with the kind of certainty that left no room for doubt. And as the waves crashed below, she knew she had made the right choice. Months later, they stood beneath an archway adorned with white roses, surrounded by the people who mattered most. The ocean stretched behind them, the same place where she had first realized she was falling for him. As Silas slid the ring onto her finger, his voice was steady, filled with promise. "From the moment I saw you, I knew you were different. I knew I would do whatever it took to keep you in my life. And now, standing here, I know that loving you will be the best thing I'll ever do." Wren's eyes burned with unshed tears as she held his hands tightly. "I never thought I'd find something like this. But you showed me that love isn't about fitting into someone's world, it's about building one together, and I want to spend the rest of my life building ours." Silas cupped her face, his thumb brushing against her cheek. "Then let's make it unforgettable." As they sealed their vows with a kiss, the world around them melted away, and for the first time, Wren knew she was exactly where she was meant to be.